Good evening. I'm Ronald Crutcher, president of the University of Richmond, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's Sharp Viewpoint Speaker Series event about the 2020 elections. I especially want to acknowledge all the veterans joining us this evening. We are truly, truly grateful for your service. During tonight's program, our speakers, moderator, and I will be wearing face coverings. At a time when COVID-19 is surging locally and nationally, it is critically important that the Spider community continue to lead by example and take care of ourselves and one another. While I regret that public health conditions prevent us from gathering in person, I'm pleased that our virtual format allows us to reach viewers well beyond the boundaries of our campus. The Sharp series was established in 2011 in honor of Richard L. Sharp, a nationally recognized entrepreneur, to present competing views on topics crucial to our nation and our world. Sharp was a recognized thought leader and an exemplar of personal and professional integrity who served as a mentor to aspiring business and community leaders. Among his many professional roles, Mr. Sharp served as chairman of the board at Circuit City, CarMax, and Crocs Incorporated. Mr. Sharp was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease in late 2010, but continued to demonstrate his values of leading by example and making the world a better place until his untimely death in 2014. The university celebrates its commitment to Mr. Sharp's vision by fostering important dialogues that challenge us to think critically about the many pressing issues of our time. This year, we welcome pairs of thought leaders with opposing views to model thoughtful and substantive dialogue across political and ideological divides. In this bitterly polarized time, when any discussion around race, religion, or politics teeters on the edge of diatribe, it is critically important to provide students with role models who can openly and energetically disagree without acrimony. We are fortunate to have a robust lineup of speakers this year who can help prepare our students for the challenges that lie ahead and give them information that can take them into the classroom, living room, or workplace. Now, in just a moment, I will welcome my colleague, Professor Ernest McGowan, to introduce tonight's thought leaders and moderate a discussion about the 2020 elections. Dr. McGowan is an associate professor of political science with expertise in campaigns and elections, voting and participation, and political behavior, among other areas. Thank you so much, Dr. McGowan, for leading tonight's important discussion. I encourage our audience to engage with us too by using the #YouAreSharp hashtag on social media. Thank you once again for joining us this evening. Now, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Ernest McGowan.
Thank you, President Crutcher. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm pleased to introduce tonight's thought leaders, Mary Kate Cary and Marianne Marsh. Mary Kate Cary is currently Practitioner Senior Fellow at the University of Virginia's Miller Center. From 1989 to early 1992, Ms. Cary served as a White House speechwriter for President George H.W. Bush, authoring more than 100 of his presidential addresses. Following her tenure at the White House, Ms. Cary served as spokesperson and Deputy Director of Policy and Communications for U.S. Attorney General William Barr and Deputy Director of Communications at the Republican National Committee under Chairman Haley Barbour. Today, Ms. Cary is asked to write speeches, presentations, and reports for a variety of national, political, corporate, and nonprofit leaders. Her assignments have included State of the Union responses, Republican National Convention addresses, and TED Talks. Ms. Cary is joined this evening by Marianne Marsh, a principal at the Dewey Square Group in Boston. Ms. Marsh is a nationally recognized political analyst who provides strategic counsel for Fortune 100 companies, nonprofits, and political campaigns. Throughout her career, Ms. Marsh has advised national grassroots organizations regarding their public policy campaigns and served in senior roles on the campaigns of Senator John Cary, Senator Edward M. Kennedy, and Massachusetts State Treasurer Shannon O'Brien, as well as a staff member for Cary. Ms. Marsh is a Democrat political analyst on the Fox News Channel, the BBC, and Radio New Zealand, among other channels. She also provides commentary and analysis to national and local media, including the Boston Globe, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Politico, the AP, the Times of London, and USA Today. Welcome to the University of Richmond, Marianne and Mary Kate. And thank you again for being here. I'm looking forward to a robust conversation. So let's start out generally. What are your overarching thoughts about the 2020 election?
Well, I think first of all, thanks for having us tonight, and thanks for this discussion. It's a very important one, so timely, especially just a week or so after the election. For me, it was one of the greatest days for our democracy. Millions of Americans turned out to vote in numbers which have never been seen in this country. Joe Biden got more votes than any other candidate for president in the history of our country. Donald Trump got the second most votes of any candidate in our history. And to see that many people turn out over a long period of time and on election day in the midst of a pandemic speaks volumes about our country, of our people, and of our election system and our democracy. To me, that was very heartening. It also spoke volumes about how much people wanted change. Joe Biden won the majority. He is the president-elect. That is indisputable. And the fact is, the people who supported him want change, and they want to change from Donald Trump in the course he's taken these last 4 years. Now, the fact that Trump got the second most votes ever in the history of the United States certainly means his supporters support him all along and continue to do so, and will for many years to come, probably. But for our democracy, for our elections, for this country, and everything that it stands for, the fact that millions upon millions of Americans turned out to vote and voted for Joe Biden in record numbers speaks volumes about all of it.
Okay.
Ernest, thanks for having us tonight, and President Crutcher, thank you. And I'd also like to thank the Sharp family for their generosity continuing with this series. I think it's wonderful. As Marianne said, I completely agree that this was a great day for American democracy. The American people really rose to the occasion. This pandemic has been a challenge for everyone, and the fact that so many people were able to get to the polls or vote early is amazing to me, and I'm very happy no matter what. As far as the election results go, I think the counting is still continuing. But there's still plenty of good news for Republicans, especially down ballot. There were quite a few surprises in terms of, it looks like they're going to hold the Senate. They made great gains in the House. Republicans still have a majority of governorships, state senates, state legislatures. There's a lot of good news for both sides in this election, and I think that's good too. There's a lot of people upset on both sides, but there's also a lot of good news on both sides.
So we've heard a lot of talk, particularly since 2016, about polls and their accuracy. So simple question, did the polls get it wrong again?
I don't think so. I mean, national polls, I think, were basically right, and here's why. If you look at the last Wall Street Journal poll going into this election, they had Biden winning by 10. Okay, he didn't win by 10, but if you understand polling, the margin of error was plus or minus 3. You take 3 points from Biden, you give 3 to Trump, and you end up at 4. This race is going to end up at about 4%. It's almost there now. So in that respect, they weren't wrong. However, a lot of state polls were wrong. A lot of the sites that aggregate polls were wrong because they use polls that aren't very good. And when you average bad information, you get terrible information. And when you look at what has happened with polling, it's an expensive proposition. So media outlets who are hiring pollsters, and in some cases not great ones, very limited money, it is expensive to hire good quality polls. You need live interviews. You need a lot of them. Getting people on the phone is hard. Using the IVR online, not as reliable. Huge margin of error. And I think that's important to remember. And there are excellent pollsters out there, and let me point to one, Ann Seltzer. The Iowa pollster for the Des Moines Register and elsewhere has gotten the Iowa caucuses right every single time. She's never been wrong, and that's the hardest thing to poll. And she also, 3 days before the election, on Saturday, said that Donald Trump would win Iowa by 7 points and the Republican and Ernst would get reelected. And she got slaughtered. And you know what? She was 100% right. Trump won Iowa, won it by 7, and Joni Ernst got reelected. And so there are great pollsters out there, but we all need to do a much better job because bad polling, or any polling, influences the coverage of the race. The way the race gets covered influences people's opinions and fundraising. And then it comes back all around again because then that influences the next poll. So I think we've done a great disservice to the American people on the horse race piece. But if you're going to do it, we should, you need to do it well. You need to spend the money. You need to invest in it because that information, like all information, is important to be right. It's important to have the facts. And that was a big, big miss in a lot of respects. But overall, I don't think it was as bad as people have made it out to be. And my last point is, I think there's a lot we haven't learned from 2016 in that election that got compounded in this election. And when you have unknowns and bad information compounded again, it really makes the whole situation much, much worse. And that's like much of this election with disinformation and other things has to be corrected going forward.
Mary Kate?
I would second a lot of the things Marianne just said. And Marianne's much closer to this as a grassroots organizer than I am as a speechwriter. But the takeaways that I saw from the polling were really two. One was, I think the reason so many polls were wrong is that there is a disconnect between some of these polling organizations and regular Americans who may or may not feel comfortable giving their political opinions. Whether they're getting reached or not by the pollsters is another issue. I used to get polled all the time by Gallup and Pew on my landline at my house. I don't have a landline anymore. When my cell phone rings, if it's not a number that I don't recognize, I tend to not answer it. So I can understand certainly that the technology has not caught up with the polling industry. And they need to figure out how they're going to poll people more accurately in the future. And figure out the technology aspect of this to get people to answer. Because right now, you can't just do landlines anymore. And I'm not sure that electronic email type of polling is secure. So how do you fix that? So that to me is the most interesting thing about the polling is how are they going to fix this going forward?
Thank you. So Mary Kate, you were on the successful 1988 Bush-Quayle team. Can you tell us a bit about your strategy for getting independent voters and kind of talk about how Biden and Trump did in their efforts to get independence?
So back in the day when dinosaurs were roaming the earth and the Bush-Quayle campaign was in full force, I used to write, I wasn't a speechwriter at that point, I used to write something called the Line of the Day, which was this great fun. Every morning at about 9, I would get my assignment. Today is, capital gains tax cut day, or today is, environment day, whatever. And but then by 3 o'clock, I had to have one page ready to go. And that was, the one page went out to all 50 state chairmen by fax, because we didn't have emails yet. And that was in case anybody got called onto the nightly news. They would have something from the campaign before they went on the air. So I was getting my marching orders straight from the campaign leadership. And the whole message to independent voters was that Michael Dukakis is out of the mainstream. That was over and over the same phrase. There's a great American mainstream. George Bush is in it. Michael Dukakis is outside of it. And that was a very effective message because people want to be part of that great center in American politics. At least back then they did. These days, the independent vote is, I believe, about 38% of the electorate. More people identify as independents than as Republicans or Democrats. And so the strategy continues to be that you can't just capture your base, you've got to expand and pick up the independents. In this election, I would say the way that the Trump campaign did that was to say, in effect, the same thing, that the far left Democrats are out of the mainstream, whether it's defund the police, Medicare for all, Green New Deal, whatever it is, out of the mainstream. And the Biden campaign did a version of that, but instead of going on policy, they went on personality and said that President Trump's behavior is unacceptable. This is not the way normal people behave. And they made it more about personality than policy. But that same axiom was still true. Out of the mainstream is, I think, how both campaigns basically did it. So The more things change, the more things stay the same, you know?
I take a little exception with that. Just
It's
a
okay,
little,
go
just
ahead.
a little. I mean, I don't think the Biden campaign did as much on the personality part as it was about COVID. And that Joe Biden drew a stark contrast by not only in word, but in deed and how he presented himself every day, always wearing masks, not doing big rallies, doing all the things all of us here are doing tonight. And most people are doing in terms of trying to deal with COVID, social distancing. His rallies were in cars like you were at the drive-in back in the day, all of those things. And I think in doing that, and he has continued that since the election, a sharp contrast that reminds people of this is what presidents used to look like. This is how they used to act. And he's continued to fill that void. And every day, including today, side by side, you see the choice voters had. And I think it was just that, a choice. Yes, I agree that some of the Republican Trump claims, whether it was defund the police or socialism, weren't taken seriously enough by Democrats because that's not what most Democrats are saying, and it hurt a number of candidates, including in this area, Abigail Spanberger and others. It certainly, the socialism claims hurt in Miami-Dade because people weren't fighting back at them. So in that respect, they did a better job defining some of those things. But at the end, this was a referendum on Donald Trump. And Joe Biden kept it that way, and he showed people the choice they had with him, which was the antithesis of Donald Trump.
So, Marianne, you got your start in grassroots campaigning. Can you talk a little bit about the strategies of Trump and Biden on the grassroots and how successful they were?
Yeah, so I would say Democrats have always been much more successful at grassroots, and the Biden campaign was no exception. But obviously, they had to recalibrate because of COVID-19. But here's what you get, and this is why, back in the day when I started, I was a field organizer. Now grassroots is cool. But what it really does, it's the heart and soul of democracy because it's open to everybody, no matter what. And it's based on the donor activist model, where if you give $5 or $10, $25, $50, maybe $100, that's a lot of money for that person. But if they give you that money, they're going to vote for you. They're going to work for you. They're going to get their family, friends, colleagues to vote for your candidate. And they're going to keep doing that again and again. And it has a multiplier effect. And I would just point, for example, to Act Blue. In the third quarter alone, Act Blue got $1.5 billion with a B dollars in low donor donations. Not the big fundraisers that used to drive candidate schedules or their attention or their time, and in some cases influence their policies or positions. This was open to everybody. And I love that the most because that's how everyone can participate. You don't have to give money to be a good citizen and a voter and all those things. But I think that's the way you buy people in, and everyone can make their little investment. And with that investment comes time and their heart and their soul and a vote. And I think that's what this election was really all about.
So in this election, we saw two very different campaign strategies, particularly once COVID hit and got really bad. So Joe Biden was kind of out of the way and didn't hold very many huge public rallies, whereas Trump did kind of the opposite. So do you think that one strategy was more effective than the other?
That's a tough question because so much of it depends on what your attitudes are about COVID. And certainly these massive rallies were making news because people couldn't believe 55,000 people showed up in Butler, Pennsylvania. And that seemed to imply that the enthusiasm was all on the right, and that his campaign had some momentum to it. But the concern is, of course, are all those people safe? Was this a good idea? And it depended on what state you were in, whether let me put it this way. One of the things I've noticed during COVID is that the disease itself has a span of some people don't get sick at all. Some people are asymptomatic. Some people get pretty sick. Some people lose their lives to it. At the same time, you've got the economic impact of it. Some people can function fine on Zoom from their house. Some people have a very difficult time with small kids doing the Zoom from home and things like that. And some people have lost everything and have gone bankrupt. And some people are on the front lines as healthcare workers and people like that who are at great danger. So when you put those two on top of each other, there's no sort of one-size-fits-all solution to how this all should go, because so many people react in so many different ways. Now it's getting more uniform because it spread so much over the United States and is so many areas are at the same pace. But for a while there, some states had almost zero and some states were hotspots. So that's what makes it a hard question to answer, because it was such a unique moment in time for this campaign, and whether to be out of the public spotlight or whether to have massive rallies. And it was two different strategies, and I think probably both campaigns thought their strategy worked.
Well, in the end, one prevailed, right? So I think what people saw in Joe Biden, who was very cautious about COVID, it showed that he would actually take action. This is, Trump team, it was very hands-off and almost in your face about it, to your point, with the rallies, without masks, and yet felled by it too. Biden, on the other hand, stayed at home, stayed socially distanced, wore a mask, and really modeled that behavior across the campaign. And I think there are a lot of people in this country, the majority, who expected and wished that the federal government and its leadership would have done more. And so you've already seen in the last few days, Joe Biden has been explicit about who's going to do his COVID planning, who's going to implement it, how he's going to do it, and giving speeches about it all along the way, the kinds of things that should have happened last March. So I think for all the mocking of the Biden strategy, it was pitch perfect for the majority of people in this country who know and understand that if you deal with COVID, you can get back to work, you can go back to school. We could have an audience tonight if we would just deal with this one thing, and that's what's going to happen. So in the end, I think that was a really smart strategy.
So the COVID pandemic has definitely changed everyone's lives. Myself, as teachers at the University of Richmond, our classes are different than what we were taught to teach, the whole time. So can you talk a little bit about how COVID has changed campaigning, speech writing, and jobs and stuff?
Yeah, I would just say the biggest change is there's no retail campaigning, right? So retail campaigning in campaigns is, when you go out and you see people, you shake hands, you have events, the meet and greets, all the kinds of things one would normally do. And many candidates kind of ride that, they get in position because of that personality, because of the personal touch. Politics is a human business. You look someone in the eye, you take their full measure and say, can you be president of the United States? Can you be my senator? Do I really believe and trust what you're saying and doing? Do I trust you with my future and my family's future? So that's very personal. And everyone had to shift for the most part and do that on screens. Everything was a Zoom something or other. Everything was on a screen. Politics always had screens going back to the beginning of TV. You would do TV ads and everything, but you would get multiple takes on it. So your candidate would look the best possible. Yes, all of us have done TV and everything since March, largely on small screens, not with the help of the Fox makeup people and everybody else who's been helping us and leaving your phone on and all the other things. Our standards have definitely dropped. But, in campaigns, everyone had to do that adaptation. And if you told me 4 years ago that Barack Obama was going to do a video about how to fill out your ballot and put it in 2 envelopes and sign it and send it, I would have laughed at you. But here we are. So I think everyone did a great job adapting, and I think much of it, like so many other things, we're not going to change it. We're probably going to keep these things. So life continues probably beyond this, and as it was as we came into COVID, on a lot of screens. But I hope we don't lose the personal touch, because in the end, it's those connections and those conversations you have with people one-on-one when you're out doing doors and talking to people and try to persuade them, not only in campaigns, but just in life, that I think everyone misses the most.
So the thing that I saw from a communications point of view is 2 different ways it was handled to have these 2 conventions by Zoom, which is usually the apex of what you're talking about. Packed room full of people, you can see them, you can connect with them. These conventions, there's a reason they do that. So on one hand, you saw at the Republican convention, not a bunch of famous elites, celebrities, things like that. You had pretty much everyday people standing at a podium, but giving speeches on how the policies that of the last 4 years had changed their lives. I thought that was highly effective. However, it was at a podium as if there was an audience there. So it was a little odd, but the speeches I thought were very powerful and very convincing because the people were not famous. On the other hand, then you go to the Democratic convention, and the one that jumped out at me the most was Michelle Obama, just sitting, talking right into a camera, no podium, highly effective one-on-one, as if you're just talking only to her. And I had clients who called and said, change my speech. I want to do the way Michelle Obama did. I had a tremendous number of clients over the last year who suddenly had to switch to Zoom speeches, and nobody is giving a 20-minute stem winder anymore. Most of my clients want 3 to 5 minutes looking into a Zoom camera because they know people will turn off the camera at about the 5-minute mark and go do the laundry or whatever. So they've got to keep everybody. So it's a much more hard-hitting message. There's not a lot of wasting of time up front. You go right to what you need to say because you've only got probably 5 minutes. So that's what I see the effects of the political campaigns on the rest of the country as a result of the communications morphing during COVID.
I would just add one thing to that. I mean,
Yeah.
I agree with what you said, and Michelle Obama, then there's everybody else. But there are moments that you can't predict. And in the Democratic convention, it was that young boy who had a stutter from New
remember
Hampshire,
that?
who came out, and Biden had met him in New Hampshire. Remember, Biden came in 5th in New Hampshire.
Right.
Everyone had written him off. And this young man, young boy, getting up in front of the country, really, and reading his statement, talking, and still struggling with his stutter. That was the most powerful moment of that convention. And I mean, if you look on Twitter and everywhere else, I mean, everyone was so stunned by it, so embracing, tears everywhere, and just really cheering on that kid.
Yeah.
But you couldn't script those things. So there's nothing, to this day, nothing beats a real story, a real person, a real emotion. And you can't plan those things, and you're always surprised sometimes at which one really resonates. But for me, I think many people, that young man, who still to this day has been giving speeches and cheering Biden on and talking, and the fact that Biden has been coaching him how to overcome his stutter and all the little tricks, gave him his cell phone and number and all that. I mean, that's remarkable. And the fact that you can get that feeling, even though not all of us were home watching on a TV or a screen of some sort, tells you the power of communication and that we can still have that effect on people.
People love a good story.
They do.
Yeah.
So President Trump was definitely not a politician, and President Obama didn't spend too much time in the Senate. That is not the case for Joe Biden. And so what do you think Joe Biden, as a legislator, knowing the Senate rules and things like that, do you think that he and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell are going to be able to work together to make some deals?
We were actually talking about
Yeah.
this after our last event. I mean, I think I would start by saying in front of that, let's see who runs the Senate. There
Yeah.
are 2 Senate seats left in Georgia. And if Democrats win those 2, then Kamala Harris is the tiebreaker. And I think Democrats have to understand, if you want Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to be able to do the things you want, you got to win those 2 Georgia seats. Because they won the one in Alaska. Republicans have 50. I think that's going to affect everything.
Yeah.
But
In North Carolina too.
well, they called it
Tuesday.
Fertilis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you want Joe Biden to have that agenda, it's important to win those 2 seats. That said, as we were saying earlier, Obama used to send Biden to the Hill to cut deals and work with Mitch McConnell and all that. I think Mitch McConnell is a different person than he was in many ways 4 years ago. I am not that optimistic that he's going to become fundamentally different than he has been of late. But I hope for the country's sake that they can work things out. And the margins are so tight on both sides that they're probably going to have to be more compromises. But at this point, it's way too late to start taking action. A lot of what Joe Biden's going to deal with Mitch McConnell and others should have been done months ago. But for the best interest of the country, everyone needs to get to work and get the job done.
I would add to that, I completely agree that those 2 Senate seats make all the difference in the world. We won't know the outcome till January 5th. And that whether the Republicans or the Democrats have the majority in the Senate will determine who President-elect Biden can nominate to be in his cabinet. It's a very different list if the Republicans have to vote on those nominees rather than the Democrats. And second, it's going to change his legislative priorities and the kinds of legislation he can start with right off the bat. And if the Democrats hold the majority, then the left side of the party is going to want to have a lot more say in what goes on. If the Republicans hold the majority, it's almost as if Joe Biden can blame Mitch McConnell and say, "Oh, I can't nominate all these people from the far left because I can never get them past the Republicans." It's almost like he can blame McConnell and go more towards the center if he needs to. So it may help Joe Biden in that sense, if the Republicans get the majority, because he can use them as a straw man. We'll see.
That's one tactic, but look, we are in a pandemic. We're in the worst economy since the Great Depression, and the country is upended. And McConnell, again, has already said, I'm not going to give Joe Biden his cabinet picks. I'm going to object to some of them. I mean, this is a guy who not only stopped Barack Obama from appointing a Supreme Court justice. I mean, I think we could have fought much harder for that one. We should have. Look what happened since. But he was perfectly happy with all these acting secretaries for these last 4 years. The very bare minimum is to allow a president to get their secretaries, to get their cabinet, unless there's some egregious reason to not appoint them, and then, yeah, vote them down. But don't come out of the box and say, I'm not going to support his cabinet nominations. I mean, that's not a great start.
So we've definitely seen President Trump have a particular brand of campaigning and also galvanize a particular section of the country. Now that he will not, presumably, now that he will not be president, do you think that brand, the Trumpism, still rests in the Republican Party without President Trump?
Well, he doesn't seem to be going anywhere, does he? I mean, he's basically saying, I'm running in 2024. He's still raising money and all those things. I mean, I think he was basically the Tea Party on steroids, right? And the Tea Party fizzled out once a couple of issues went by the wayside. I'm sure that Donald Trump's going to keep stoking that fire when he leaves office. But I also think that two things. One, I think he's going to face an awful lot of challenges when he leaves office, and I think he's going to have his hands full. And I think Donald Trump is not going to look better as time goes on once he leaves the White House, most likely worse. And the other part of it is, I think the more people see Joe Biden and see a government solving their problems and getting COVID under control, getting people back to work, back to school, I think they're going to remember what that felt like to have a functioning government, a functioning society, a functioning democracy. And I think that's going to have a great effect too.
I would say that Donald Trump has transformed the Republican Party. I would have said 4 years ago it was absolutely a hostile takeover, and that it was not what anybody thought was going to happen. And the enduring legacy that he will have, whether he ends up winning, which I kind of doubt at this point, or not, is he has, if you look at the exit polls, he expanded the base. He got 7 million more people to vote for him this time than last time. If you look at the numbers in the exit polls, increase the number of Black Americans, the percentage of Asian Americans, the percentage of Latino Americans who all voted for him, and that's a good thing for the Republican Party. In terms of policies, he's certainly going to have a lasting effect on the judiciary, the number of judges at the lower levels that he put in, Supreme Court. You've got all of the economic, the deregulation, the trade, excuse me, not trade, the jobs, the unemployment numbers that we had before COVID. That certainly made a lot of people think twice and vote for him, even though they didn't care for him personally. I think they liked the policies that he stood for. The thing that is going to be the question going forward for the Republican Party, I think policy-wise, is what to do about trade. And there are an awful lot of people in the Republican Party who are free traders, and Trump certainly turned that on its head. So that's, to me, the most interesting question of what is the future of the party after Trump. But in terms of the good things that he did, I think that caused a lot of people to think twice about voting for the Democrats and came over and voted Republican, even though they weren't necessarily fans of Donald Trump personally.
There's one other thing he did, which is Donald Trump, with COVID and the murder of George Floyd, laid bare our sins and made it clear to everyone in this country that we are not who we think we are when it comes to race and equity and a bunch of other issues. And that COVID and the economy and systemic racism has affected every element of our society, and you could not ignore that. And I do think while there will always be a diehard group of people who will be with Trump forever and ever, amen, it is the opportunity to start to address long-standing issues this country has faced and ignored or not worked on in the years to come. So I think that's one of the opportunities that came out of this. I mean, awful tragedies all, but it's impossible to ignore these things now, and we have to work on them because we can be much better. And I think that's the great opportunity that lays in front of all of us.
Well, speaking of what some people consider very long-standing and important problems, in the Democratic Party, we're seeing wings develop a progressive wing and a more moderate wing. Do you think that that is particularly detrimental to the party? And do you think that Vice President Biden will be able to bring that together?
I mean, part of it again rests on those Georgia seats, right? And look, I would rather be the big tent of everybody. I like the fact that we have a spectrum of people that are the Democratic Party, that it's not restricted to any one set or group of people. And yeah, there's a family fight on a regular basis. But at the end of the day, right, at the end, you know, if someone comes after your family, you stick up for the family, even if you don't like that family member or something like that. So I think there are so many challenges in front of us. Yes, there will be plenty of squabbles along the way. And I think the media in particular loves those fights, and especially certain personalities and having them define the whole party or, you know, every other thing about democracy. But I think that it will be a sideshow compared to what's really staring in our faces to deal with.
And so
I
Mary
just
Kate,
think-
kind of the view from afar.
I just think I have put up with 2 decades now of press reports on the Republican Civil War. And, and it is so nice, like, for once it's not us. so I'm looking forward to seeing how it all plays out and how they handle this, because our side has certainly been through this quite a bit. And we'll see what happens. I think it's fascinating which way the party will go, the Democratic Party.
All right, we actually have a question from the audience. In your opinion, do you think the states, specifically Pennsylvania, violated the U.S. Constitution by altering or changing the voting laws for mail-in ballots?
No. I mean, it's simple. There's no law or constitution that was broken. That was decided by the people who were elected by the people of Pennsylvania to handle COVID-19. It was approved by one and all. And elections are state matters. They are handled by the states. And I think the fact that as it was, we saw lines and lines of people standing out there for 5, 10, 12 hours waiting to vote is not a good look for democracy, reflects on our election system, frankly, badly. But to encourage people to vote by mail and allow them to do that so they could be safe and not expose themselves to this disease, it was a responsible, thoughtful thing to do. And every one of those ballots were reviewed. Every one of those ballots went through a machine. Every one of those ballots were counted. There were witnesses to all of it. And it was on a live stream all day long. So there was nothing illegal about it, not one thing.
So Mary Kate, I'll just ask you, the perception of the changes happening and the rationale for why they're happening. Do you think that some of that also dealt with your discussion earlier about the feelings about COVID and its seriousness?
Well, certainly this was an unprecedented campaign, as we all know. And so I'm not willing to go as far as Marianne is on this. I'm not a lawyer. I can't really speak to the litigation aspects of this. But as far as the counting of the votes go, there are 6 states that have been, 2 have been called by the media, 4 have still not been called, that were still being counted. Alaska has a huge margin of votes that are still being counted, but the rest are all greater than 98% and yet less than 1% difference in the vote. So they haven't hit 100% yet. And the main thing I say to my students in my class is, in this country, the media does not decide elections, state election boards do. And so it is perfectly acceptable for the president to say, I'm going to wait until all the counting is finished. Now, whether he wants to litigate is a different question. But I think as long as we're all patient, let the counting keep going until we hit 100%, because this is an unusual time. And there were millions of mail-in ballots, and there were new rules. And this has been an extraordinarily different time for an election. And yet, like we said earlier, the American people rose to the occasion. The millions of people participated, which is a great thing. And let's be patient and let it play out. Litigation's a different question, but I'm all in favor of giving it a few more days till everybody's votes are counted, because those 6 states that are still counting total 75 electoral votes. And that's a lot of votes for less than 1% difference, you know?
So Mary Kate needs to talk to Trump. Okay, because one day he was saying stop the count, the other day he wanted.
Yeah, you can't say stop it and start it.
Right, depending on what state it was in.
No,
and
you
all
can't
that stuff.
pick and choose your states.
So
Yeah.
the fact is, of what's remaining, Joe Biden has 5-figure plus leads in all of them. If you even do a recount, which Georgia decided to do today, hand recount all 5 million ballots, good luck to you. God bless. The most that ever changes is 400 votes. We're talking thousands of votes here, thousands of ballots difference. So it usually changes 200 to 400 votes tops.
No, I'm just saying finish the counting.
Yeah, finish the
Separate
counting
than a
too.
recount.
Right, but still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the media does not decide.
Well, historically, the media has always come out and said AP calls a race because based on the votes that have been cast and counted at a certain point, the degree of certainty that that outcome continues is 100%. And so far, they've been right on all of them.
In a normal year.
In every year.
Yeah.
We voted during civil wars, and newspapers said, here's the winner because of this. You know, we've gone through depressions, all of it, and they've always been right.
Okay, we shall see. Go ahead.
Oh, all right, we have another audience question. Thank you all for your participation. Keep them coming. Can you speak to how confident you feel that Biden will actually be able to take office in January, and that he will continue to have, and that we will continue to have a democracy in this country?
I'm absolutely 100% certain that we will still have a democracy. I think all signs point to everything going on time. This counting that we were just talking about needs to be finished by December 8th, and then by December 14th, the Electoral College votes. And all signs are that that will all happen. And I believe this is not any sort of threat to our democracy, and everything will work out the way it always does. So I'm an optimist.
I am too, but I can see why this question came in. And what is important to remember, Joe Biden will be president and take the oath of office in January. But the 70 days between here and there, it's going to be a bumpy ride, people. Buckle up. I mean, there are going to be a lot of things we've never seen before. I mean, today, again, Donald Trump is hinting at trying to, speaking of changing things, you know, trying to change the electors and leaning on the Republican legislatures in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania to put in Trump family-friendly electors instead of those duly elected by the people of that state to reflect their votes. So there's a lot of stuff going on. You should be concerned about the changes that Donald Trump made at the Pentagon, likely to do at the CIA, likely to do at the FBI, and many other things. None of that is good, but we will prevail in the end.
Do you want to talk a little bit for our students in our community about slates of electors and who actually gets to send electors to the physical electoral college meeting?
Yeah, I mean, just the brief answer here is I'm sure on election night and the days after you saw each state, how many electoral votes they had and all that, those actually represent real people. Every state has a different process, but you have to send electors that reflect the outcome of your state, of that vote. So 4 years ago, we had a lot of fights about faithless electors who went in and said, I'm a Clinton voter, but now I'm going to vote for Trump or somebody else. That really sort of mucked up the work. So I think that's what people are looking at. So if you go back and look at it, you need 270 to be president. Joe Biden's in excess of that already, probably ends up at 306. Those people have to reflect the mandate and the votes of the people in the state they come from.
Right, and we know that the actual electoral college margin for Clinton and Trump is not the official one that's in history because of those faithless electors.
That's exactly right.
So there was a Supreme Court decision this fall in which the faithless electors from last time were fined by the states for their misbehavior. And the faithless electors took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yeah, you can get fined. Yeah, the states have a right to lower the boom on you guys. And so that sent a clear message that the Supreme Court said, you can't just go off and go rogue here. So I think that's a good thing, that hopefully that means that will not happen this time. But it does make you wonder why the president would be pressuring people to be replaced as electors when they're on the ballot in most states. You vote for a person whose name is not necessarily Trump or Biden. You're voting for the elector. And so we'll see what happens, but that's the kind of thing that could get litigated, I would think.
Yeah, and let's hope the Supreme Court doesn't get involved in this election as they did in 2000. I mean, obviously Donald Trump always telegraphs what he's going to do, and when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, he made point blank clear that his nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, he wanted on the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court was going to decide the election. And I have a hard time thinking John Roberts wants to do that, but those are the kinds of things people have to be aware of.
One more audience question. Given the amount of misinformation circulating, What news sources do each of you recommend?
Ooh,
So
after you.
Oh, thanks. Get off your Facebook page is what I got for you. Look, there are long, and I'm sure people who are watching won't like this answer, but I think it is always important to look at legacy media. People, institutions that have been around for decades, hundreds of years, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, your local paper, if you're lucky enough to still have one. Those are important things. If you're going to get most of your news online, please don't just hang out with your friends. Go across really good, known, reputable sites. Don't go onto Parler, which is where all the Trump people are going. Facebook has its own problems. Twitter has its own problems. Go to actual news sites. There are great reporters out there. They are not perfect, but they go through, they have to vet things, they have to get their information confirmed. Use those news sites and then educate yourself. Be a good consumer of news. Use your brain. Be a good citizen. That's why you turned out to vote. You have to keep being a good citizen and a thoughtful one every single day to keep this experiment going.
I would go along the same lines and advise people to read from both sides of the aisle, and especially opinion commentary. In addition to going to reputable sources for your news, I go to the AP a lot. I don't necessarily go to the mainstream media types because I think there's a lot of advocacy journalism these days. But the news services like AP, I think are pretty safe. For my polling, a lot of times I go to Gallup and Pew, and I think they're usually very long-standing. You can compare it to previous year's answers, things like that. And then for opinions, I go to Real Clear Politics because they will go right next to each other, two columnists on different sides of the coin on the same subject. And I think that's very instructive for people who want to see what both sides are saying at the same time. And I think that's helpful, not to just only read conservative media or only read liberal media. So that's what I do.
So we have a lot of students that are tuning in. What advice would you give them for either entering your fields or also if they want careers in public service?
I mean, mine is go work on a campaign. And you should work on as many campaigns as you can, especially when you're young. You will learn more, get paid less, have more responsibility than you will ever have in your life, and you will learn skills and meet people that you would never have the chance to do. You will be given the kind of responsibility you would never get in another entry job, because campaigns are all about how can we get all of this done with this few people and even less money. And the people you meet become your networks. The people I work with to this day, I met on my first 2 campaigns. And I think that speaks volumes. And when you go and do that, go work for somebody that you truly believe in, that you put your heart and soul in, because you are going to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day for a pittance. But if you really work for someone you believe in and invested in, that experience is even better, because then you know what it's like to be committed and what the process looks like. And even if you lose, go run another campaign, go work in another one. Learn how to win. Winning is a learned skill. And there is no tougher competition, I would argue, than a hard-fought campaign as we saw this year and 4 years ago.
So along the same lines, I was 23. I took Marianne's advice, even though I didn't know you at the time, and worked on a campaign at age 23. And it was a national campaign, obviously. And next thing I knew, I'm a White House speechwriter at 24. From then, I went and freelanced speechwriting for 20, 25 years after that. And so here's my shameless plug for young people to be speechwriters, because the type of people who are hiring a professional speechwriter are usually very interesting, very successful people with great stories. And it's fascinating to meet these people. If you're freelance like I was, you know, you can go full time and just write for one person all the time, or you can freelance and write for all kinds of people. And that's what I did. And so you learn about all kinds of subjects, all different industries, all different ideas. It's absolutely fascinating. I would recommend that you have a spouse with a regular paycheck, because because speechwriting is sort of cyclical, where nobody gives speeches in August or Christmas, things like that. So you got to even it out over the year. But it's been a fascinating thing to learn how to persuade people. And even if you're only a speechwriter for a few years, those skills can be used in just about any industry. Marianne and I were both talking about how important persuasion is in so many different parts of your life, and how to get people to change their minds, how to handle a hostile crowd, and change people's attitudes it's a great skill to have no matter what you do. So there's my shameless plug for being a speechwriter, and hopefully lots of students here at Richmond will pick it up.
And to take action. We talked
Yeah.
about that too. I mean, we're all in the persuasion business in life. We're all in the communication, but we're always trying to get someone to do something you want them to, and to take action. And in
Right.
the end, you can talk all day long, but unless you act, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, how do you get them off the couch?
Right.
Well,
Right.
I could talk to you all day long, but we're running out of time. So do you have any final thoughts?
I'm going to end the way I began. I am so heartened by the number of people who came out in this election and voted despite all the odds. And I think that we showed the country that by showing up and casting a vote, we showed the world that we took our democracy back, and that we can come back from these things, and that we are going to continue to be the great country we've always been. And I think that was an important lesson, not only for the world, but to ourselves and to the generations behind us and the generations to come. That's how important this election was. And to me, that was everything.
I'd say I ditto that, but I also would add, I sense from some of the young people in my life that there's a fair amount of anxiety right now, and I just offer patience, and this will all work out, and let's let it all, hopefully it won't be as bumpy as you think for this next 70 days. Wouldn't that be nice? And so in that case, I hope you're wrong.
I hope I'm wrong.
But we will get through this, and I'm greatly heartened at the level of enthusiasm in our country for politics right now, and for young people to stick with it and hopefully help us change the world. I think it'd be great.
Be hopeful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for the conversation. And now we'll have concluding remarks from President Crutcher.
Thank you so much again, Mary Kate and Marianne, for engaging in this important discussion with us this evening. And thank you to Dr. McGowan for facilitating the discussion. I mean, this was actually amazing for me to, after having our little practice session last week. I mean, you all are cooking with gas tonight. Really, it was fantastic. We could have gone on and on. So thank you so much for taking the time. I also want to thank everyone in our audience for joining us this evening. And for those of you who sent us some questions, thank you in particular. Richmond is really grateful to share this learning opportunity with you, and we very much hope you will join us for future events. Now, the next Sharp Series event, which is our last one for this year, will be on March 26th at 7 p.m., again via live stream, featuring a conversation between scholars and public intellectuals, Cornel West of Harvard University and Robert George of Princeton University. Doctors West and George will discuss the importance of fostering dialogue and cultivating friendships across ideological and political divides. I hope you'll take time to join us next March. Until then, thank you so much for being with us. Good night and happy Thanksgiving to all.